So first, let me welcome Nikita and both the panelists, Mr. Buddy Ranganathan and Mr. Balwant Joshi. Nikita is the lead author of this report that we are going to discuss today. And she has since moved on from Prayas Energy Group. She is now a doctoral student at the University of Buffalo in the United States, where she's pursuing research looking at just transition in renewables and agriculture. She's been very kind to give us time and attend this webinar. So thanks, Nikita, for all the good work in painstaking work in putting this report together. And we have an excellent panel before us. We have Mr. Balwant Joshi, who's the managing director of Idam Infra. Most of you in the renewable energy space will have known him quite well, I'm sure. He's been with the sectors right since the beginning. He's close to 3 decades of experience looking at various issues panning the renewable energy sector, working with state ERCs, with policymakers, and even the ministries at the center and the CERC. So thanks, Balwant, for joining us, and I'm sure you'll give us a rich history and place this report and this work in the context of the larger sector. And finally, we have Mr. Buddy Ranganathan, who's the very experienced advocate. He's worked a lot on the electricity sector, amongst other issues. He's worked at the CERC, the Supreme Court, the Delhi High Court, and the APTEL, and a lot of state regulatory commissions as well. And he's also the Energy Secretary of the Energy Bar. So really happy to have you with us, and I'm sure you'll throw light from the legal perspective as well. So thanks once again. So the format for the webinar is I will begin with a very short presentation on the report. The report is already online and many of you might have already seen it, but I'll make a short presentation of around 15 minutes. And then we'll open the session for opening remarks from the panelists and a Q&A session. So we have plenty of time. So I would request all the attendees to type in their questions in the Q&A box. And even if they have comments or something, do type in the chat window. We'll also try to answer them as and when possible. Maybe I'll just request all of you to turn off the videos now for some time, and then we can restart the videos once the presentation is over. Can you see the screen now? Right, so let's begin. So the outline of the presentation is, I'll give a little bit of context and how the methodology for the report has been put together. And then there'll be two sort of sections to the presentation. One is a little bit of a statistical overview of what work we have done, and then what are the substantive issues that come to the fore from the analysis. So that's the outline. So the context is pretty clear. The share of renewable energy is steadily increasing, in fact, accelerating. And we find that it is very critical to understand what are the RE specific or the renewable energy specific regulatory issues and the increased litigation in the sector, because this is very valuable to policymakers and regulatory officials as we make new regulations and policies. And tracking these regulatory decisions is very important to assess what is the sector direction in which it's moving, where are areas where there's lack of clarity or lacunae in the existing governance framework. So I think this is very important. And with this context, I think the aim of this particular study or this report was to look particularly at Maharashtra. We took the decade of 2010 to 2020, and we looked at all the orders and judgments published by MERC and APTEL in this period. So we have a concrete comprehensive database of all these cases, and if at all we have missed anything, we welcome your feedback or any comments at the email listed there. So the timeline, just before we go into the methodology, if you look at between 2005 and 2020, here is a list of all the regulations related to renewable energy that were put out by MERC, beginning from 2005 with the open access regulations. Then there was a little bit of a lull, and the first very RE specific only regulations came in 2010 with the RE tariff regulations and the RPO and the REC regulations. Again, there was, because the control period was 5 years, we didn't have anything till 2015. But then after 15, you will see that there is a significant increase in the amendments, in new regulations of net metering, forecasting and scheduling, so on and so forth. So if you look at the period after 2015, there is a very strong emphasis on renewable energy as renewable energy capacity has been added into the system. And again, all this is documented very comprehensively in the report. So I will not go into each and every element in the brief presentation here. So what is the total breakup of these orders that we saw that I listed here? So there were total of 589 proceedings, including petitions, appeals, suo motu orders between in this decade. And if you look at MERC, there are over 400 orders. And they are based on 494 petitions, because a lot of them petitions have common orders, so the number of petitions is much more than the orders. In APTEL the number is much lower, 36, and that's why we have this total of 589, and the breakup is given in the graph below. So most of it are petitions originating at MERC, and then there are a few review petitions within MERC, a lot of suo motu orders, especially on RPO compliance, and then you have 40 appeals going into the APTEL, which are RE specific and Maharashtra specific, most of which are again appeals, and there are few original petitions and review petitions at the APTEL. And what is the methodology on the database? So we collected these 589 proceedings, and we ascribed a total of 17 tags or descriptions or metadata for each of these orders. And I won't go into all 17, but things such as, how does the proceedings initiate? Was it an original petition or a review petition? What is the topic under consideration? A PPA issue or open access issue or a RPO issue? What is the subtopic? We even did subtopics within RPO. Is it RPO compliance or change in RPO regulations or clarifications? Whether it's a principled issue or a procedural issue. Then what is the energy source within renewables? Who is the primary respondent or the appellant? What was the decision, whether it was dismissed, partly allowed, and what are the dates in terms of from when the petition was filed and to the date of the order. So in all, we have 17 such tags for each of these proceedings. And based on these 17 tags, we did a statistical analysis, which I will go into now. So the first thing we can see is, what is the share of renewable energy in all these petitions in this decade in MERC itself. So if you look at the blue line, that is the share of renewable energy in the total petitions. And as you can see from 2014-15, there has been a sharp increase, and much more in the last 2 years, culminating in 60%. This one last year may be an anomaly, but you can see the rise, and even the absolute number has increased significantly to over 150 in the last 2 years. So one can see that a significant or over half the orders or proceedings that the MERC is dealing with in the last couple of years is related to renewable energy. And we see that this trend will hold, that when we are collecting orders for 2021 as well, I think the share of renewable energy is significantly high. So this is one clear trend, that the share of RE proceedings is increasing quite rapidly. And then if you look at the distribution and the breakup of petitioners and the respondents, so on the left, we have over 609 petitioners, because there are some common petitioners, so which are listed separately. So that's why we have more number of petitioners, but just less than half of them are IPPs mainly, so renewable energy generators. And the second most common one is the distribution companies. The third one being, captive generators or consumers. In terms of the respondents, obviously just below 3/4 of them is the distribution licensee. So you can see that if the petitioner is the IPP, obviously in most cases the respondent will be the DISCOM, and then you have the SLDC for the forecasting and scheduling regulations or RPO compliance, followed by the SARC. So this is the distribution of petitioners and respondents. And then if you look at the pendency over the years, that is the left graph, and as per the topic, which is the right graph. So if you just concentrate on the left graph for the time being, you have the x-axis, you have the y-axis, which is the number of petitions or appeals. And if you look at the x-axis, which is the number of years, so the black line is the number of petitions or the appeals that have been filed. So that has been increasing. And then you have these different colors, which is a sort of categorization of time period in months in which these orders were finally concluded. So you have the green bars, so which is, you know, the lowest amount of time within 3 months. Then you have 3 to 6 months, 6 months to 1.5 years, and 1.5 more than 1.5 years. So you see, most of the orders in the last few years have taken less than 3 months. So that's quite a short period. Then the second most common is obviously 3 to 6 months. But there are very few, especially in earlier years, which are more than 1.5 years. So very complex issues which have taken much more time. And if you look at the right graph, the y-axis is the number of days from the petition to the order, and the different colors show the different topics. And the box is basically the median plot. So it shows the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile, wherein, you know, the time taken for these orders. So for a lot of them, it is, you know, close to 100 days, or that's around 3 months or 4 months. But if you look at some of the issues, basically tariff related issues for which there were 110 proceedings, PPA related issues for which there were 161 proceedings, you have quite a few outliers. So some of the cases took really a lot of time. Goes to show which issues are really complex and which also shows a lot more. So like open access, PPA, and tariff are the most common issues that come up for proceedings. You can see RECs is hardly anything, and RPO also, because of the yearly suo motu compliance, you have a lot of orders. So that's the looking at the pendency over topics and over years. Then we look at, you know, what is the petitioner wise distribution of all decisions on orders and judgments at MERC and APTEL combined. So the inner donut or the inner concentric circle, you will see which are the petitioners. So you have the IPP, which is the biggest petitioner, followed by the DISCOM, followed by captive consumers. And then the outer donut is sort of what are the decisions. So you will see that, let's say if you look at the two biggest petitioners, that is the IPPs and the DISCOMs, then around 40% of their cases are in which the decision was, or their prayers were fully allowed. With IPP, you have around 37% where they were partly allowed, but with the DISCOM, that number is much lower at 17%. And 24% of the cases were disposed of with regard to the DISCOMs, but that number is much lower at 12% with regard to IPPs. So this can give you a sense of which are the kinds of petitioners and how does the decision distribution vary according to the petitioner. Then we have another breakup. Again, this is a little complicated, but you have the report to go into this. So now you have you know, disaggregation by MERC and APTEL. APTEL cases on the left and MERC on the right. And then the inner circle or the inner donut shows the type of renewable energy resource. So you have wind cases predominantly, because this is the decade of 2010 to 2020, where wind was much more dominant in Maharashtra. And the outer donut shows the topic at hand. So you will see that at MERC, the biggest topic by far is for related to wind energy and related to payment delays. The second one is related to open access and procedural issues, like, you know, credit notes not being issued on time, or some procedural issues, or NOCs not being given on time, so on and so forth. So this gives you an idea that which renewable energy resource has the most amount of proceedings and which is the issue within that. Is it RPO? Is it tariff? Is it forecasting and scheduling? Is it payment delays? So on and so forth. So this again gives us a very good idea of the mix of energy resource and the topic at hand. Now, moving on from the statistical analysis to the substantive bit, and I just have last 2 or 3 slides before we move on to the panel discussion, uh, is 3 topics. So in terms of PPAs, we see that over 74% or 119 of all the PPA related issues were related to payment delays. So that is very, very clear that these disputes related to payment delays have been recurring time and again, and they haven't reduced. In fact, they have increased over time. And assured and timely payments, it's very common sense that it's imperative to ensure that such delays do not happen and do not adversely impact future investments in RE, because the risk profile of RE investments may go up if you continue to see payment delays, and that would mean higher prices to all the consumers involved. The second issue is open access. So in all, there were 23% of all the cases were related to open access, which is around 138 proceedings, and 65% of all the open access cases were procedural. So such as, delay in permissions, delay in credit notes, payment dues for surplus injection, or incorrect accounting treatment of surplus, or non-compliance of earlier orders. So these are more procedural and operational, what we categorize them as. And 20% of the cases were debating or arguing on the principles of open access. So be it reduction in contract demand, automatic reduction in contract demand, the type of banking facility, multiple sources of generation, and concessions on open access. So this is the distribution within open access. Most of them are procedural and operational, and there has been a lot of litigation. The report goes into details of this. There's been a lot of litigation, and it shows that clearly discoms have been affected and they have not facilitated it, open access in the right spirit, we see. And the role of SERCs becomes very crucial here, because we feel that it should proactively address implementation gaps and ensure a level playing field and to further competitions, which is sort of enshrined in its own regulations and order. And some sort of market monitoring committee or higher transparency can address these procedural operational issues and reduce this time spent in all this litigation and proceedings. And the larger point, I think, which is very, very important for the whole sector, is open access is particularly contentious because it directly affects the financial health of the discom, and some innovative long-term and balanced risk reward framework is needed. Otherwise we will continue to see this litigation in the future. And my last slide is on the RPO. We've seen that MERC has been very consistent and methodological in terms of M&V. We have very, very timely yearly orders on compliance of RPOs. To take the example of the biggest discom in Maharashtra, MSEDCL, the non-solar RPOs have been achieved in the last few years, but the solar compliance is still very lax. And in 3 instances, MERC has invoked Section 12 of its RPO regulations and not allowed these costs as pass through. With regard to solar RPO compliance monitoring, the RPO credit with regard to rooftop is still an issue, and it cannot be tracked without discoms accessing the solar meter data. This was an issue that was brought up by IDEM itself when they did the review of the report. Uh, and we feel a significant improvement is needed in the MNV with regard to open access and captive entities as well, because we have not yet seen orders in open access and captive RPO compliance. The longer or the insight from this is we feel that RPO targets are still crucial for RE promotion, though the RE prices have become very, very low, competitive, and they're fixed. They have still not been met in their totality, the RPO targets. So we still feel that RPO targets are necessary in the medium terms, though we see that a lot of private discoms in Maharashtra are procuring large RE well beyond the RPO target as well. So that is something to debate as well. How is the utility and evolution of the RPO targets in the future? So with this, I'll conclude the presentation. Hope this was useful, and I really hope for good questions and feedback from the audience as well. I will stop sharing my screen now, And with that conclusion, before I begin to request Balwant and Buddy to make their opening comments, I'll request everyone to turn on their videos, especially the panelists. And just to leave you on that note, that we have seen the three important stakeholders, that is the SERC, the DISCOMs, and the RE IPPs, need to be, in our view, sort of more pragmatic and proactive and forward looking, because the RE transition is accelerating, and we need more competition, more fair and balanced frameworks to accelerate and to reduce this cost of power procurement. So for DISCOMs as well, though open access means sales migration and financial hit on their a hit on their finances, they can also lower their average power per procurement cost by increasing renewable energy shares. Similarly, for IPPs, I think it's paramount important to understand the pain of the DISCOM and to not sort of continually want concessions on the RE open access or RE captive, and come together for a more balanced framework, which is good for the entire sector. So with these thoughts, I would now first request Mr. Balwant Joshi to give his opening remarks, and then we'll move on to Mr. Ranganathan. Over to you, Balwant.
Yes, thanks a lot, Ashwin. Thanks, Prayas, for inviting me over here. While I was just preparing for or reading the report, I just realized that this is probably the first time I'm on Prayas platform, though we know each other for more than 20 years now, since the first 1999 commission's first case one of 1999. Yeah, but it's good to be here. Thank you so much, guys, for inviting me. And I need not vouch for that. You guys are doing the great work, whether it's RE generation related issues, distribution reforms related issues, IRP related issues. And the current report is an excellent example of the good work that you guys are doing. Gone through the report, my colleague Ajit was involved in reviewing the report. Excellent report. A good amount of statistical analysis of the orders and also substantive issues as presented by Ashwin. So great work. I think this kind of activity, this kind of analysis of the regulatory orders is needed, not only in Maharashtra, but also multiple other states. And as we move forward, probably a lot of in-depth analysis of the thinking also can be seen from these orders. I have a few comments on the order, a few comments on the report, but probably we will get into those comments later on. But before that, I think the report traces the period from 2010 to 2020. The reason is, or the rationale is also very obvious, and the kind of activity that has taken place. But as Ashwin said, there is a lot of history, especially in MERC for the renewable energy, what activities have been done in renewable energy. Incidentally, the commission, MERC, was the first state to announce any kind of a feed-in tariff in the country. And if you see, the feed-in tariff or a generic tariff as a concept doesn't exist in Electricity Act. And Electricity Act has got only two mechanisms, Section 62 and Section 63, to determine the tariffs. Section 62 goes on cost plus basis, and Section 63 is a competitive bidding based tariff. The commission came up with the benchmark cost-based tariff. It was a novel at that time. Today, we may not feel it. Today, we may take it as a granted. But at that point of time, there was a lot of debate in terms of whether the commission can do it, whether it would be called regulatory overreach. And the commission took a little bold step and said, yes, we will go ahead and do it. It was first done under 1998 Act for the Bagasse Cogen. Subsequently, in November 2003, the order was issued for the wind as well. And that paved the way for feed-in tariffs in the country. Subsequently, many regulators issued the feed-in tariffs for different technologies, and that continues even today. Even for waste-to-energy and some of the other technologies, the tariffs are being issued today. But this feed-in tariff also did one very interesting thing. It moved the renewable promotional policies from fiscal policies to the regulatory policies in the electricity sector. Prior to the feed-in tariff, the mechanisms which were being used typically were accelerated depreciation, the tough funding, which was which was quite instrumental in Tamil Nadu. In Maharashtra, it was a sales tax benefit, and the similar benefits were being offered in different parts of the country. But the feed-in tariff firmly ensured that all the costs of renewable energy are enshrined within or are included into the electricity sector in the country. And I would say this is the contribution of the Maharashtra Commission to the renewable energy sector. Another very interesting innovation which the Commission did in the before 2010 was technology specific targets. Commission issued the technology specific target in case of multiple technologies. In case of wind, it was 750 megawatt. In case of Bagasse Cogen, if I remember correctly, it was 150 megawatt. Then subsequently, the target was issued even for the small hydro sector. So the issuing technology specific targets, and then subsequently these technology specific targets were enshrined in something called renewable purchase specification, and which we subsequently converted into renewable purchase obligation. So this was a very unique methodology was adopted to decide the targets, set the targets, and subsequently in 2003 in the renewable purchase obligation. So Maharashtra also, again, in the case of specifying the renewable purchase obligations, one of the first states to do that, if I remember correctly, it was the second state after Andhra Pradesh who did that. And a lot of credit, or for actually the credit for all these innovations, whether it's a feed-in tariff or the technology specific targets or RPS, goes to Commission. And at that time, the chairman and Dr. Pramod Dev, who was there, instrumental in doing this. On the substantive issues, I think I will look at only two issues. Ashwin talked about a couple of issues, but one is RPO compliance. It doesn't really bode well for the state like Maharashtra, who's supposed to be a very progressive state, who has taken a lot of initiatives in promotion of renewable energy early on, is not able to meet the RPO targets. And the situation is similar, whether it's a distribution companies or for the captive consumers, open access consumers. Captive and open access consumers, there is also an added challenge of the data. And what we see is that many a times the RPO targets are rolled over. Sometimes some penal actions, strict actions has been taken. But at the end of the day, what matters is result. And after 17 years of 2003 Act, we see the RPO not being met certainly is not good. Not only that, no action has been taken under section 142, 146. So in my view, in terms of substantive issues, the first substantive issue is non-compliance of RPO. Even today, unfortunately, RPO is required, even though the variable cost or the cost of generation LCOE of wind and solar is many a times lower than the marginal cost of thermal generation. But despite that, RPO is required, and I think some very stringent procedural as well as penal action is required in this regard. The second issue, which I feel is a net metering regulation or the rooftop solar sector. We have seen flip-flops in the past, in the recent past, and which has actually kind of stalled the rooftop sector. Grid support charges that have been proposed, subsequently, thankfully, not implemented. 2000 megawatt target has been set before it is implemented. But I think it has put a spanner in the development of a rooftop sector. In my view, I think there is nothing stopping rooftop sector or even solar wind when the costs are dropping down so much. While everyone understands the need to balance the interest of the utilities and the consumer, one shouldn't overlook the economic benefits of wind and solar. Overlooking economic benefits of the wind and solar, or particularly distributed solar, is causing economic loss to the country, and which is not pardonable. The utilities must come up with ways to do the cost-effective integration of the distributed solar. As far as the large integration of large scale integration of solar or wind is concerned, there are standard methodologies. We also know the cost of it. But for the distributed that we don't know, I hope the Commission would take very strong measures in this regard and ensure that whatever the potential available in terms of the distributed renewable energy sources that is tapped, that is made use of. So I will stop over here at this point of time. If there are any questions, I will come back again. So thanks once again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Barswan. We'll certainly come back with more questions to you. And now over to Buddy.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Shantanu. And thank you, Prayas, for inviting me over here. It's a great pleasure to be on the Prayas platform. Prayas is an organization whom I've been in touch with on and off for a good almost 15 years, I think. And like Balwant, Prayas is definitely an institution in the electricity sector by their own right. So do excuse me for coming before you in my robes, because that's because I have another matter going on another screen right now on the side. But be that as it may. The 3 or 4 points, sorry, before I start, actually, I really must compliment Prayas, Ashwin, Shantanu, and whoever else was involved in this report in bringing out this lovely, crisp analysis. I mean, I think it was an eye-opener on many aspects, which I had not even known about, despite the fact that I've been associated with MERC litigation and APTEL litigation ever since day one. So it was a bit of an eye-opener for me as well. But there's the 4 or 5 small points that I wanted to bring to you is, one is that the report focuses, and very rightly so, on the delay in payments to RE generators. The thing that I've noticed is that this issue of payments to RE generators is not really limited to RE generators, but it is really symptomatic of a larger malaise in the electricity sector in India today. And it's not that it's only RE generators who are not getting paid, but it's also thermal generators who are not getting paid. And Balwant, of course, is probably, far more conversant with tariff determination and regulatory assets than all of us put together here, perhaps. But I think Balwant will agree with me, and so will Prayas, that really speaking, the issue of payments is largely because of the non-economic retail tariff determination, which is happening right across the country. It's a smaller measure in some areas, it's a larger measure in other areas, but the issue of payments is a very vital issue, and it's not limited to RE generators alone. Another point which I was thinking of putting in place just for all of you to think about as well is that why is it that large hydro is not considered a part of renewable energy? This debate has been raging in different parts of industry and in different parts of government that I'm aware of. And I have tried to discuss it with several people, but I find no discernible logic in limiting renewable energy to only those hydro generators which are less than 20 or 25 megawatts, as the case may be. And why should larger megawatt generators not be considered as a source of renewable power? So this is a thought which I wanted to leave with all of you, and maybe, I have the opportunity of hearing some possible answers from all of you, which I have not got as yet. The third point which I wanted to place for you is that, yes, the report does a tremendous analysis on the time taken for disposal of petitions, the time taken for disposal of appeals. And in certain aspects, it's not a very happy situation. But be that as it may, I think one aspect on which I think all of us in the sector should try and analyze a little more, and perhaps this is just an idea for Prayas to also consider, is to actually try and analyze what effect the judgments of the commissions in the APTEL have had on the particular sector to which they relate. I know it can get awfully contentious. I know it can get awfully, what should I say? You can step on a lot of people's corns one after the other. That's a very high possibility once you start getting into that kind of analysis. But just to give you a small example, the report also shows, and very rightly so, as to what happened after the APTEL judgments in OP1 of 2013, OP2 of 2013, and OP3 of 2013, and the effect that it had on the observance of RPOs, the seriousness with which commissions started taking up matters of RPO subsequent to that judgment. So like that, what would be the effect of several of these judgments which have been passed by the APTEL and the orders of the Commission? Have they improved the sector? Have they improved what they were intended to? Or have they been retrograde in whichever way? So that is one part of a qualitative analysis that I think is worth looking at. But as I said, it'll have to be done with a little bit of caution, as it could get awfully contentious at times. The fourth point is, and I agree with Balwant, that the feed-in tariff orders were among the first to, MERC was a pioneer in this aspect. In fact, MERC has been the pioneer in a lot of aspects in the electricity sector, and generic tariffs for renewables was just one of them. But my limited experience has perhaps shown, and I'm subject to correction on this, that generic tariff orders never really fulfill their objective. And partly because I think in large instances, I'm not taking any specific cases, but I think a lot of renewable energy generators were also in their own way looking at seeing which side of the bread is buttered more. So, if a generic tariff order was thicker butter, I mean, they would go for it. If it was not, it would be bidding. And therefore, and equally, there was no obligation on generators to enter into PPAs and a generic tariff order. So like there was a purchase obligation on the part of DISCOMs and other obligated entities, there was no corresponding obligation on generators to enter into PPAs at generic tariffs. So that was one way perhaps in which generic tariff orders never really perhaps lived up to the expectation that could have been set. And the fifth and the last point which I wanted to place before you all is what I indicated to Ashwin and Balwant the other day when we were chatting was an awfully controversial one. These are my own personal views. And it's a rather radical thought. But in today's day and age, when renewable purchase obligations are being increased across the board, I am personally of the view that it is time to start paring down the renewable purchase obligations. And this is for the reason, it's not an unreasoned thought. There is a reason behind it. You may agree with the reason, you may disagree with the reason. The reason behind it is that renewable purchase obligations were enforced at a time when renewable energy could not compete with conventional forms of energy in terms of cost. That was the biggest factor behind renewable purchase obligations. Because we saw solar tariffs at 16 rupees and 17 rupees a unit. And today we are going down to, almost 2 rupees a unit, which is cheaper than not only than the marginal cost of thermal power, but including the total cost of thermal power. So today, when these are the kind of costs and rates that we are talking about, is there a rationale for continuing with RPOs? Is a thought that I think bears thinking. Yes, RPOs have achieved a lot of part of their desired obligation. Undoubtedly, there are defaults in RPOs as well, but even with the defaults in RPOs, you've seen from Ashwin and Nikita's statistics as to the increase in capacity and the increase in generation and the share of renewable energy in the total generation of the country. It's phenomenal. Today, in fact, we are staring at excess capacity in the system. The other reason why I'm also a little reticent about continuing with renewable purchase obligations is I think today, to some extent or the other, obviously it could still be better, but to some extent or the other, DISCOMs are a little more experienced and professional in procurement of power. Today they have the data, they have the statistics, they have the technology, they have the wherewithal to plan their procurement better. And any professionally managed DISCOM today knows when it needs renewable power, when it doesn't need renewable power, when it needs thermal, when it doesn't need thermal. What is the basket of power procurement that works best for its particular load curve? So today, if you ask me, I think we should seriously rethink about continuing with RPOs in the sector. There are many other ways of incentivizing renewable energy. Believe you me, I'm as much a believer in renewable energy as anybody else. But there are many other ways of incentivizing renewable energy. You already have waivers in transmission charges, you have waivers in cross subsidies charges, you have several other ways in which renewable energy is being incentivized. There are, of course, huge problems in terms of getting connectivity, in terms of getting other clearances from statutory authorities. But if you ask me, that's a far better way of incentivizing renewable energy rather than enforcing a mandatory purchase obligation. So these are the few 4 or 5 thoughts that I wanted to place with you. Thank you very much, Ashwin. Thank you very much, everybody else. And I look forward to taking any questions that I can hopefully answer. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. And yes, that's the last point which you mentioned about the need for continuing with RPOs is certainly a topic that needs wider debate and discussion. And there can be different views on that. As I concluded, we still feel that there is a need, at least in the short to medium term, for those targets. But maybe Balwant wants to come on that, and maybe he can also complement, because he mentioned about RPOs not being meant after so many years. As in, is it just a matter of ERCs being more stringent with their penalties or their penal mechanisms, or is it more a case of opening up market instruments such as RTM and GTAM, which have come into place in the last 6 months? And also, if he could comment on the RPO compliance, especially with the captive and open access consumers, because though we see DISCOMs have not met it, but the captive and open access is even further behind.
That's right. So am I audible? Yeah. So the first thing, whether the RPOs are required, I think as Ashwin said, for the medium term, the RPOs are required. Even today, it's not easy to get it into the power procurement process of the distribution companies, the renewable purchase. We don't have a very detailed process. We recently carried out a study to see what is the power procurement process and philosophy of the distribution companies. And we really don't have a very elaborate processes to do the power procurement planning. Okay, so it's more done on the basis of the volume. So what is the quantum of energy that is required? And then the very little assessment or study about the seasonal load curves of the different RE entities, and how do you really mix and match different RE technologies so as to optimize the RE generation. So that kind of a capability, while there is a significant improvement in terms of the outlook towards renewable energy, still that those technologies don't exist, those processes don't exist. Even if you see the MYT tariff regulations or MYT regulations of the different states, very rarely those kind of reports are asked by the regulator from the distribution companies. Yes, while I agree it is cheaper, that process just doesn't exist today. Okay, so the regulators, forum of regulators will have to come together and develop a process wherein the RE becomes integral part of it. In my earlier remark, I mentioned about IRP. A lot of work Prayas did earlier in 2003, 2005. I don't know whether they are still working on that space, but in terms of IRP, and hardly any IRP regulations exist in the country for doing the resource planning. If we have that, I take your point, buddy, that then we may not probably be required to have separate renewable purchase obligation. But till such time we don't have a very holistic power procurement process planning for the distribution companies, some kind of RPO would be required. Second issue about the compliance, I think it is general lethargy. Like, in what we are complying with. Are we complying with performance parameters in terms of SAIDI, SAIFI, those performance parameters? So it's a general apathy towards any performance targets is, I think, is the root cause of non-compliance even in this case. While in this case, the compliance should be easier as compared to the other performance parameter for the distribution companies. See, the generating companies immediately get penalized because their excess costs are not allowed. But the performance parameter for the distribution companies don't get immediately penalized. And that's the reason wherever it is possible to ensure compliance, it should be done. And what is the root cause? If you ask me, general apathy towards compliance, I would put it. That's the primary cause. In terms of captive and open access, there is an additional challenge in terms of data. What we understand is that captive and open access open access, at least the data in terms of energy is available. But in case of captive, in situ captive, the data about the generation, they were not required to submit to anybody. As a result, that you can't even calculate what is their RPO obligation. So that's a challenge in case of captive and open access, and it's all over the country. Recently the CEA has started some process in terms of mandatory registration of the generators. I hope that process would get extended, and the stronger data collection process for entire generation, whether it's in situ or through open access, that, and we have some good numbers, reliable numbers for the consumption by the captive and open access consumers. So once we have that, then we would be able to implement the RPO. Also the issue, the RPO, I think it has been debated a lot. Who's the nodal agency, whether what kind of a responsibility can be entrusted to it. So there are some fundamental challenges even in that, and we need to overcome those.
Thanks. Thanks, Balwant. Maybe a question to Buddy now. We've seen, especially in this analysis, that there has been a significant amount of litigation when it comes to open access. And with every 2-3 years, when the open access regulations have changed, when it comes to especially this issue of energy banking or contract demand reduction, or recently even these concessions, and this is not specific only to Maharashtra, but we have seen other states as well, where a policy has given in, a state government policy has given in some concessions, and then they have been abruptly removed or removed retrospectively. So this has created a lot of litigation, and unless, and it seems as if this policy decision making is only through litigation, because there's no consensus building. So how do you look at that, and do you also see a lot of contention in this whole open access story?
Oh, absolutely, Ashwin. I fully agree with you on that. You see, unfortunately, it's very easy to change the law. It's very difficult to change the mindset. So distributions being a natural monopoly, distribution licensees are natural monopolists, okay, by the very nature of their activity and the nature of their business. They do not want people going out of their system. And it's a very natural thing to want. I mean, you can't expect it to be otherwise. So, in keeping with that philosophy, every single distribution licensee in this country, public or private, has done the maximum possible to see that open access is not completely free, unrestricted, and unarbitrary as it is supposed to be. In some small form or the other, every single licensee has tried to cut it down. I mean, I have personally witnessed, and I will not name the person, I have personally witnessed a very senior officer of a distribution licensee in a state at a public forum saying, no open access in my tenure. Okay, I mean, on a public forum. So that is the philosophy with which we are working. So yes, grant of open access has led to a huge amount of litigation. It is just not warranted. It is just not in keeping with the spirit of the act. Right in 2007, the appellate tribunal in the Hindalco judgment had in fact said that open access is the lifeblood of this act. But today we see that all the way up to 2021, we still continue to need blood transfusions every couple of years. So yes, there is a huge problem when it comes to the actual implementation of the policy on the ground. And as I said, you can change the law, but what you need to do is change the mindset. I mean, in fact, many years back, Prayas had given a brilliant suggestion to the MERC in terms of cross-subsidy surcharge. And I still remember, I think it was Shantanu who gave that presentation in a public one of the public hearings in the MERC, that levy a 200% cross-subsidy surcharge on short-term open access and levy a 0% cross-subsidy surcharge on long-term open access, so that you cause less trouble for the distribution licensees. Because short-term open access is what actually troubles the distribution licensees an awful lot more than long-term open access. No commission has ever done it, not including the MERC or any other commission has ever done it. But it is with strategies like this that you can try and improve compliance with open access principles and procedures in the electricity sector. So, like any other regulatory scheme, I think what you need to look at is a carrot and a stick approach. Having only a stick approach is simply not going to work. So if you're going to add a few carrots in it as well, hopefully the mindset will start changing. So that's what I would like to say on open access.
Thanks. Moving to Balwant again. Balwant, just largely thinking about, while the DISCOM needs to change its mindset and sort of embrace open access, but from the generator side, as Buddy said, looking at the more buttered side, this whole issue of open access concessional charges or energy banking, is that a right? And we have seen most regulators now moving to monthly banking or even sort of stopping banking altogether for certain classes of consumers. But as you said, you can't stop the economic argument. If RE is really cheap, then there's going to be a strong push for self-consumption or third-party consumption. So how do you see balancing of this whole open access in the long term? So as Buddy suggested, short-term versus long-term open access can be treated differentially in terms of prices. But with more market instruments like RTM, GTAM coming in, how do you look at a fair or a balanced risk-reward open access regime going ahead, and which should also help in reducing this litigation?
Yeah, thanks, Ashwin. I think Buddy's comment about which side has got more butter was more related to the RPO compliance and the generators not entering into contracts with the distribution companies, even to sell to distribution companies for meeting RPO compliance. Yes, it has been unfortunately true, and somehow the greed has been kind of sometimes overtake the prudency in terms of decision making. But what we have generally seen is my personal view is that FIT has played its role. FIT has certainly helped in kickstarting the entire RE ecosystem. Okay, and now it's right time that we moved into the competitive bidding and procurement through the Section 63. Well, there can still be debate whether e-reverse auction is the right way of doing things. The way the lot of project developers are renouncing the contracts today. That is something that we need to look at it. But the first question about the distribution companies meeting RPO and the generators role, yes, I think that as FIT has played a role. Generators have been sometimes responsible or looking for more IRRs and ever increasing expectations of IRR. That has fortunately gone away now. Coming to the open access, I think we need to distinguish between the incentives and some of the concessions which are fundamentally against the business. Okay, so giving any waiver of transmission and distribution charges is one thing, and saying that you can go for open access for more than contract demand, or saying that the banking would be permitted on year-long banking would be permitted. That is certainly can't see. That is the significantly different and fundamental damage to the processes and the systems that would take place. So my personal view is that while certain concessions are required, you just can't equate rupees per megawatt transmission open access charges for the thermal power project and the renewable power project. So certainly some kind of a concession that would be required. You give it on the basis of rupees per megawatt to the thermal generator, you give it rupees per equivalent rupees per unit to the renewable energy generator. But giving the banking, first of all, banking is fundamentally against the principles of forecasting and scheduling. against the principles of deviation settlement mechanism. So some concessions, some benefit for them that would be required. Hopefully that would go away with the battery management systems coming in. But that those kind of concessions should be avoided. While some concessions in the form of say transmission and distribution charges, some kind of a waiver, some kind of a concession should be continued at least for the time being.
Okay, thanks, Varman. Coming to Buddy again, Buddy, you must have seen this recent consumer rules that were notified by the Ministry of Power, and one of the contentious issues over which a lot of webinars have been had is this whole issue of net metering versus gross metering, and this threshold of 10 kilowatts, which has been notified. And some see it as, a right to net metering up to 10 kilowatts, but there is no clarity what happens beyond 10, whether it is in the state's jurisdiction to decide that you can have net metering up to 1 megawatt or less than that, or is it mandatory to follow these rules? It has created quite a lot of confusion. And since there have been so many new entrepreneurs and businesses set up, this stability of policy is clearly amiss here. So how do you look at this whole rules coming out? And maybe Balwant, later on, you can also talk about this whole net metering versus gross metering. Some people see it as a right. Some, obviously things have to change over time as the sector changes. But how do you see a way on that? So starting with Buddy and then Balwant.
Thanks, Ashwin. So yeah, there are a fair number of issues on these new rules which have come out. I mean, there's no shortage of issues. I mean, every time a new legislation or a new subordinate legislation come in, lawyers like us love to create any number of new kinds of issues. So I mean, that's good for everybody. There's no doubt about it. But the thing is, yes, there are lots of pros and cons on net metering versus gross metering. And primarily because there are today a lot of issues arising around the country where the captive plant of the consumer, whether it's solar, or usually solar, of course, but whether the rooftop plant of the consumer is connected to the consumer's installation before the meter. So consumers are saying that if my installation is before the meter, that is, it is connected within and inside my own installation, and it is not at the meter, then why should I go in for net metering? Because I am in any case not exchanging power with the grid. Whatever I generate on my rooftop, I consume. Now, this has also led to a lot of problems from the DISCOM's point of view, because when such installations are connected before the meter, invariably, if there is an issue in the grid or whether there's a power supply issue, very often the DISCOM finds that energy is being fed into the grid by the consumer's installation. And there are no real ways of knowing how much of that energy is getting fed back into the grid unless you have net metering. So there's a lot of to and fro which is happening on this, and there are no easy solutions, frankly. So one of the distribution licensees whom I had discussed this with was to provide for an agreement where the consumer would install cutoffs so that no energy would actually get fed back into the grid. And that would make sure that there would be no need for net metering, so that you could still continue with gross metering. So there are several issues like that which are happening, and well, there is also another serious issue really of jurisdiction, frankly, and I really don't know. This hasn't been tested yet as to whether, in fact, these rules which have been taken out by the Ministry of Power are within the powers of the central government under the Act. And there is a serious issue on these rules, which is I don't want to get into, frankly, because there are already lots of thoughts and debates going on in different forums right now on this. But yes, there are serious issues, and if you ask me, one slight problem that I face is that I don't think there was sufficient public discussion and debate on these provisions of the rules before they were enforced. So whether they are legally valid or not is, according to me, uh, of a secondary nature. I think, frankly, there should have been a little more public debate and a little more public opinion on this being sought before these kind of rules were enforced.
Right. Thanks. Balwant, do you want to comment on this?
Certainly. In fact, one of the questions which I wanted to ask Buddy is the legal validity or jurisdiction issue on this. But you have clarified your position, at least on this particular in this open forum. Having said that, I think on the core issue of rooftop system, it is becoming quite apparent that there are three broader business models that are emerging. One is net metering, second is a gross metering, and third one is a behind the meter. And when the behind the meter I talk about is a behind the meter with clearly a reverse power relay. So no power flows back into the grid. And the three should be given three different treatments. As far as the utility is concerned about the power being fed back into the system is valid concern. And there should be some way to take care of that concern. But at the same time, saying that the behind the meter systems would also be subjected to the severe charges, or in fact, as one commission has done it, one commission has gone ahead and made pronouncement at least of open access charges being levied on the behind the meter systems with reverse power relay. Now, the open access charges are under section 42.2 when there is open access, and when the system is behind the meter, how could you levy the open access charges on that? While certain grid support charges could technically make some case for that, but those will have to be minimal, especially if there is a reverse power relay. And similarly, on the sizing of the system, unfortunately, the rules talk about 10 kilowatt. It they talk about in black and white, saying that up to 10 kilowatt net metering and beyond 10 kilowatt gross metering. There was no need at all. If it is a consumer's right, it should have said the consumer shall have a right for net metering up to 10 kilowatt. Certainly, nothing beyond that. Beyond that, whatever is to be done, that let regulator decide what needs to be done and how that needs to be done, depending on the situation in the state. But my personal view on this is that there should not be any limitation on the size of the BTM system with reverse power relay. Do you put up a kind of any such restriction on the thermal power plant which are in situ? I am aware of the cases where the steel plants and cement plants have got 25 megawatt and 30 megawatt of contract demand, while the in situ generation is 2 or 3 times that. So why there should be a restriction on the size of the BTM system? What is your concern is that what is the interplay with the utility? So there could be restriction in terms of what is the quantum of energy being net metered. There is already a restriction in when the net metered energy could be set off. Like, you are not allowed to set off during evening peak. So those restrictions to take care of the utilities concern should be there. But saying that 10 kilowatt should be the size of the net metering was not called for in my view, and very frank and upfront view. It was not called for. Well, the government should seriously look at it, should review it. It should be left to the regulators to how do they take into account the concern of the utility in terms of reverse power flows. As far as the gross metering is concerned, frankly, it's non-starter. I don't see a lot of projects coming up on rooftop on the gross metering basis. Very few consumers would be ready to allow a system to be on its rooftop for 25 years of period of time. Nobody knows what would happen in 25 years period of time. So I think the moving forward, while the 3 models exist, 2 models are going to be predominant, net metering and behind the meter. And if the battery storage systems come into play, I think then the behind the meter model would be far more prevalent, and it would be damaging to the distribution companies.
Right. Thanks. Maybe we can have one last round. It's past 4 p.m. But looking at not a substantive issue, but as we have seen, at least from MERC's analysis, that the complexity of issues is increasing. The scale and the acceleration of RE generation is increasing. The amount of regulations and rules and so on and so forth is increasing. Do you see the need for a significant emphasis on capacity building at the institutions, be it DISCOMs, as you said, the IRP cell and the power procurement cell needs significant staffing or strengthening, or also at the regulators end, and how, you know, given that low cost and the fixed cost nature of renewables, how that transition to renewables can be done more smoothly. So is there a significant need for capacity building at all the institutions to make this transition any faster and smoother?
Buddy, you would like to go first?
Sure, please. I'll just take 2 minutes, Bala. And then, so, Ashwin, I couldn't agree with you more. Capacity building, I think, is really the need of the hour at every single level and every single institution in the electricity sector. Whether it is in the commissions, whether it is in the APTEL, whether it is in the licensees, whether it is in the lawyers, whether it is in the consultants. So I think capacity building is something that is a need of the day, a need of the year, a need of the decade. In fact, MERC was one of the earliest commissions to recognize the necessity for developing institutional memory and institutional knowledge, very, very early back. A lot of regulators, even in those days and even today, are operating on a model where where there is no system of retaining the institutional memory and institutional knowledge. Because a lot of the officers, a lot of the staff are coming for either on contracts for 2 years or deputations for 2-3 years, going away again. There's no sense of identity with the institution. So MERC was one of the first and the earliest to have, in fact, developed a full-fledged system of having an institution, having its own officers, having its own staff, having its own knowledge base and knowledge pool, because not everything is in the papers. So yes, I think that is definitely a must. As far as the commissions go, some of the commissions have followed suit, some of the commissions have not. But there are still some commissions which are still working on the old system. I think that's up to them to really to see the benefits of this. Even in places like the APTEL, for example, I mean, it's woefully inadequate to see as to what is the level of assistance that the chairperson members in the APTEL have. They have zero assistance. Zero as in zero. Okay. Right down to correcting their own drafts, they have no assistance. So yes, in terms of research availability, in terms of knowledge of the sector, in terms of resources to draw upon, I think it's needed even there. Because they just don't, I mean, nobody has the time to sit and actually do this kind of research, which, people like Prayas are doing. So yes, it's definitely a must. In the DISCOMs as well, what Balwant Singh is right. I think a lot of the private DISCOMs across the country have tried to invest a huge amount in capacity building in terms of power procurement, in terms of planning, in terms of professional management, etc. One has not always seen that in several of the state DISCOMs, though I must tell you that there are exceptions. And some of the state DISCOMs have some top-class officers at their helms. But I think they don't have the systems in place, and I don't have the technologies in place. And perhaps that is one place where I think, yes, a lot of improvement is definitely required. Balwant?
Thanks, Buddy.
Yeah, so I think I would like to just add a couple of things to what Buddy said. Fully agree with Buddy in terms of the broader capacity building issues in the sector, whether it's a utility, regulator, APTEL, or even consultants. But I would like to draw attention, the discussion is about RE orders and the way RE has developed. The three areas I think which are coming to fore. One is the entire area about the grid integration, GTAM, the way the markets is evolving, ancillary services. So I think the significant capacity building is required at a DISCOM level, SLDC level in those areas. So that is the first area where there is a lot of capacity building and process improvement that is required in the sector. That also includes IRP that we talked about. Second area is about at the distribution end, far end, which is being controlled at AE or JE level. That is a distribution feeder. We talk about 100%. The way if the solar systems come up in a significant number, how are you really going to manage the distribution infrastructure? there are lots of ways you can economize on the distribution infrastructure. So there is, in fact, that's a blank slate across the country. These areas also coming up, even internationally, those have started to just come up. But I think there is a lot of things that can be done or that need to be done in terms of capacity building, processes, IT solutions that are required or that are possible. And I think the third issue is about entire data issue. Okay, whether it's a consumption patterns, like, you know, I think in most of the groups, there is a currently discussion going on when the industry is impacted, economy is impacted, many people working from home, how we are clocking 187,000 megawatt of requirement, right? So the data is woefully inadequate to even make simple assessments like this today. And we don't know. There is, I think no one has ever solved the question of how much captive generation capacity exists in the country. How much is the contribution to the industrial consumption of this captive generation? And something needs to be done in order to improve that data infrastructure that is currently existing in the country. So these are the three areas, in specific areas, in my view, need a lot of capacity building as well as improvement in terms of processes and technology.
Thank you, Balwant and Buddy, for answering all those questions. I hope that was an enriching discussion. And just to answer one more question, which was put on Q&A, yes, we are initiated a similar study for Gujarat and Karnataka as well. So hopefully a few months down the line, we can do a cross-state comparison or see what different issues are there in different states as well. Thanks a lot, Nikita, for answering many of those questions in the chat box as well. And thank you all the participants for joining us in this discussion as well. And thank you once again to the panelists for taking your time for this and accepting our invitation. Thanks again. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Bye, Buddy. Bye. Bye, Ashwin. Bye, Shantanu. Bye-bye.